We're going to give everybody a few minutes to make sure everybody that wants to attend and is here has gotten into the room. I feel bad. I should have some music playing or something.
Waiting room music.
Oh no, that's terrible. We shouldn't punish them. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start. It looks like the participants have stopped being added for the time being, so people that are late are going to have to catch up. I'm Kirsten Larson. This is Michael McHenry. And I ask that if anybody has AI, that they turn it off. We don't allow AI recordings of our presentations. Michael and I are going to be here. We are putting on a pre-recorded presentation that Michael and I created, and we're going to answer questions as best we can during the recording in the Q&A. And after the recording, we'll turn our cameras back on and we'll be available for questions live until the hour is up. The recording is about 28 minutes long. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start playing this video.
Hello, and welcome to today's presentation discussing environmental review requirements for CDBG capital improvement projects. We are Kirsten Larson and Michael McHenry, and we serve as environmental specialists for the California Department of Housing and Community Development. Our contact information is provided here, and today we are going to discuss the environmental review of capital improvement projects funded through HUD's Community Development Block Grant. We will go over the HCD and subrecipient roles and responsibilities, HUD's environmental review requirements and processes, and resources for technical assistance. The objectives of this training go beyond simply summarizing the environmental review process. The broader goal is to ensure you understand what is required for HUD compliance, so that your environmental reviews are complete, accurate, and defensible. By following these requirements, you'll reduce the risk of findings during a monitoring and help protect your grant funds from potential repayment or delays.
The CDBG state program awards grants to units of local government that develop affordable housing, improve infrastructure, provide services, and create jobs. When HUD provides grants to California, HCD is the federal grant recipient and either directly administers the grant or serves as a pass-through entity. For the CDBG program, HCD will act as a pass-through entity to the subrecipients, and the subrecipients will act as the HUD responsible entity, responsible for performing environmental reviews for programs and projects in their jurisdiction. HCD acts as HUD and performs NEPA pre-monitoring assistance to all CDBG applications prior to issuing an authority to use grant funds. This reduces risk of a finding during a HUD monitoring and the possibility of repayment of federal funds. So what does a 90% NEPA review look like? The application should be for a fully formed project with a nearly completed NEPA environmental review. Regulatory consultations should be complete or underway. Some projects will need to have tiered environmental reviews when individual properties have not yet been identified. This will be explained in further detail later in the presentation. So NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, is the founding national charter for protection of the environment. NEPA requires federal agencies to consider environmental values and give them appropriate consideration in making decisions before committing money to a project, such as funding a housing project. NEPA ensures that environmental information is available to agency officials and the public before decisions are made and actions are taken. What does all this mean? Before any federal grant money is spent, the environmental review has to be complete and made publicly available. For projects that are supported by grants originating from HUD 24 CFR Part 58 is a section of HUD regulations that implements NEPA. As a subrecipient, you are responsible to comply with 24 CFR Part 58 and complete the appropriate environmental review. Once the environmental review is complete, your certifying officer, who is the chief elected official of your government unless otherwise designated via formal resolution, signs and takes legal responsibility for the review. While you can have a consultant assist you with preparing the environmental review, they cannot take responsibility for the decisions made within the environmental review. The certifying officer should understand the environmental review and agree with it. We are summarizing environmental review requirements in this webinar because we expect environmental reviews to be close to completion before applying for CDBG funds. Here are some important environmental review resources you should spend time browsing. We'll briefly touch on them further on in our presentation and provide the links again towards the end of our presentation along with other resource links. One of HUD's most useful tools is the Related Federal Environmental Laws and Authorities page, which we call the tile page. You can select the topic, review the guidance, and download compliance worksheets to help walk through the steps of analysis and compliance. We'll provide a peek of this further on in our presentation. Before you begin the environmental review process, you need to define the project. This sounds easy, but it is important to understand the proposed project scope in its entirety and include all potential activities that could be part of the project. The description should cover specific activities of the project, including exact locations, except for tiered reviews, existing conditions, size of the site parcel, proposed changes to the structure and land, beneficiaries, and all potential funding sources. A well-written project description provides a complete understanding of the project scope, including all phases and any issues that need to be addressed during analysis. It must include a well-defined area of potential effect, also known as APE, for both on and off-site impacts, and a detailed description of project construction activities. Documents supporting the project description should include vicinity maps, simple plans showing scope of work and cross-sections, photographs of the general area, areas of ground disturbance, including rough and conservative estimates of excavation, info on staging areas or borrow sites, and types of construction methods and equipment. HUD requires that environmental reviews evaluate the full scope of a project, not just individual activities in isolation. Under 24 CFR 58.32, this is called project aggregation. This means that all activities are geographically related in the same area, functionality related, same type of activity across different sites, or logically connected, part of a larger plan or dependent on each other, must be grouped together and reviewed as a single project. The goal is to ensure that cumulative environmental impacts are fully considered. For example, if you're planning infrastructure improvements and housing construction in the same area, those should be reviewed together, not separately, because they're interdependent. Failing to properly aggregate can lead to an incomplete review, which may delay funding or trigger compliance issues. Consideration of alternatives is a critical aspect of the NEPA review. At the heart of this environmental review process is the consideration of alternatives before committing any funds to a project. If HUD or non-HUD funds are committed to a project before the environmental review is approved, your ability to objectively evaluate options is reduced and becomes biased. HUD assistance cannot be committed to a project until the request for release of funds, RROF, is approved and certified. This means that no funds can be spent and no physical or choice-limiting actions like signing contracts or starting construction can happen until the environmental review is complete and approved. This applies to subrecipients, developers, contractors, and any other project partners. What are choice-limiting actions? Choice-limiting actions are activities that reduce the opportunity to choose alternatives, such as purchasing or leasing property, entering into a contract, demolition, rehabilitation, construction, bidding, and other activities such as property clearing. Some of these activities seem relatively harmless, but they may reduce or eliminate the opportunity to choose project alternatives that might be better for the environment or future project beneficiaries. So until all the environmental review is done and the project has considered alternatives and made a choice based on the best site for the project, committing any of these choice-limiting actions will disqualify the project from most all HCD federal funding. As project complexity increases, so does the environmental review process. There are 5 levels of environmental review under 24 Part 58. This includes exempt, CENST, CEST, EAs, or an EIS. As our figure shows, the most complex reports are EAs and ultimately EISs. We expect most CDBG projects will require review at the CEST or EA levels of review, and those levels are discussed more in detail in this training. The 5 levels of environmental review include exempt, 2 categorically excluded report types. One is not subject to, and the other is subject to the laws and regulations at 24 CFR section 58.5. There are also environmental assessments and environmental impact statements. An exempt or categorically excluded not subject to 58.5 level of environmental review would be used if your project is for tenant-based rental assistance, supportive services, or operating costs. These activities do not include any physical components and are just a paperwork project. You will need to look at the federal regulations and determine the exact citation to use an exempt or CNST level of environmental review. Here is a partial list of acceptable activities that can be completed under a CEST environmental review. It includes some forms of construction, which is different than the exempt and CNST review that we already discussed. Closely review the list of acceptable activities in the regulations to be sure your project is covered by this level of review. Some of the activities include acquisition, repair, improvement, reconstruction, or rehabilitation of existing public facilities and improvements other than buildings without change in size or capacity of more than 20%. For example, replacement of water sewer lines, reconstruction of curbs and sidewalks, and repaving of streets, or special projects directed to the removal of material and architectural barriers that restrict the mobility of and accessibility to the elderly and people with disabilities. Here are additional activities that are covered by a CEST review. But again, I recommend looking at 24 CFR 58.35A for a complete list. So step 1, complete the CEST form. Remember, the project description needs to include enough information about the project so each law and authority can be thoroughly analyzed. Step 2, each law and authority has a corresponding worksheet that needs to be completed. When you've answered the questions and taken the steps necessary to ensure compliance with the part, you will summarize the steps performed and the outcome at the end of the worksheet. This summary will be put into the specific section of the CEST form. For step 3, all regulatory agencies that have authority over the environmental resources described under each of the impact categories must be consulted if your proposed project may affect those resources, for example, air quality, historic preservation, endangered or protected species. For tribal consultation, HCD requires a reasonable effort and looks to see if there have been multiple outreach attempts for tribal input. A minimum of 30 days must be allowed for consultation, but 45 days is considered a more reasonable time. Step 4. Requires the certifying officer to make a compliance determination. Here's an example of the first page of the CEST template. Each topic follows the same pattern. Complete the HUD worksheet using the various regulations and resources on each topic webpage. The topic page has an introduction, HUD guidance, links to tools and training resources, a list of compliance documentation, and a link to the worksheet for that part. Here's an example using part of the first page of the air quality worksheet. It's important you answer each question to move through the document correctly. The end of the CEST requires the certifying officer to make a determination before they sign. So option 1 converts to exempt, so no laws or authorities under 58.5 apply. So the project is treated as exempt, no public notice or RROF is required. Option 2 requires public notice and RROF. One or more 58.5 laws apply and require further action. The project must complete a public notice and submit a request for release of funds. This is the correct determination when the CEST has any HUD mitigations. Option 3, the project requires an environmental assessment. The review found that the project may have significant impacts or doesn't qualify for a categorical exclusion, so a full EA is required. We will provide additional details on how to navigate option 2 next. As each federal law and authority is evaluated and the HUD worksheet is completed, the goal is to determine if the project is in compliance, or will formal compliance steps or mitigation be required. Mitigation refers to measures or actions that need to be implemented to comply with the rule. If mitigation is required, you will then complete the mitigation measures and conditions section of the report. These measures will need to be incorporated into project contracts, development agreements, etc. If mitigation is required, the project NEPA cannot revert to exempt and must publish or post a notice of intent to request release of funds from HCD. Only NEPA mitigations trigger this. Local requirements such as construction activity hours do not prevent a project NEPA from converting to exempt. If your project does not fall under the other categories, it is likely an environmental assessment level of review. An EA is often required when the proposed project has activities such as new construction or a change in land use. It is highly recommended that applicants are skilled in 24 CFR Part 58, or they engage an environmental professional with experience successfully preparing EAs under HUD regulations, which are different from the NEPA regulations of other federal agencies. An EA includes the full CNST and CEST review steps, plus identification of project alternatives, consideration of a few more environmental factors, and cumulative environmental impacts. The EA factors are additional environmental impact categories that must be evaluated beyond those in a CEST level review. The HUD Exchange website provides detailed analysis techniques and important considerations that should be documented in your EA. When preparing an environmental assessment under HUD NEPA regulations, you're required to evaluate how the project may impact and be impacted by a range of environmental factors. These are grouped into 5 main categories. Land development includes land use compatibility, soil suitability, hazards, and energy conservation. Socioeconomic factors covers demographics, displacement, employment, and income patterns. Community facilities and services looks at schools, parks, emergency services, and infrastructure. Natural features includes unique natural features, water resources, vegetation, and local wildlife. Climate and energy consider potential climate change impacts such as flooding, wildfires, or landslides, and then carbon emissions. Other factors can be visual quality and noise. For each factor, you must describe existing conditions, analyze potential impacts, determine the level of impact, beneficial, none, minor, adverse, or significant, and document sources, consultations, or any mitigation measures. To help with this, HUD provides a comprehensive environmental assessment e-guide. It's a searchable, up-to-date tool that walks you through each factor. The EA process steps and the 2 possible EA outcomes are listed here. Whether your project will have a significant impact on the environment or not is the final yes or no answer from an EA. Now we'll go over the public notice requirements. So why are public notices required? Public notices are a critical part of the NEPA process and are required under HUD regulations at 24 CFR Part 58. They ensure transparency and give the public and interested agencies a chance to comment on the environmental impacts of a proposed project. When they're needed. So if your project requires an environmental assessment or categorically excluded but subject to 58.5, and any compliance laws are triggered, you must publish a notice. The different types are notice of intent to request release of funds, also known as NOI/RROF, is required when compliance with laws under 58.5 is needed. A combined notice is a FONSI plus NOI/RROF, so that's used when a finding of no significant impact is issued after an EA. The comment period. The comment period starts the day after publication. When the comment period ends on a weekend or holiday, it should be extended to 5 p.m. on the following business day. I will now explain the various timing requirements of the comment and objection periods. If the notice was previously published or posted and received no comments, it is 7 days. If the notice is published in a news outlet such as a local paper, it will be 15 days. And if it is posted at a public building such as City Hall, a post office, or a recreational center, it will be 18 days. So the objection period. The 15-day objection period begins the day following the receipt of both the proof of publication and the request for release of funds. So how to post? Publishing a public notice includes posting at locations in the community and on local and state websites. When posting, it's important to photograph the notice in place, but to also grab a location screenshot on your phone for each posting location. Notices must be accessible to the public, including persons with disabilities and limited English proficiency. If a community has 5 or more % of a non-English speaking population, it must also publish in that language. So the proof of publication must be a legal affidavit issued by the newspaper. If a community lacks a local newspaper, it may be published on a government website. A project that requires an EIS is unlikely to be funded by HCD due to the significant environmental impacts. There is no HUD template for an EIS. The environmental review record is your official proof that all required environmental steps under NEPA and related laws have been completed correctly. It must be complete and well organized, showing every step taken from project description to public notices and agency consultation. The ERR must be available for public inception upon request. Transparency is a key part of the NEPA process. If the ERR is incomplete or missing documentation, it can lead to serious consequences, including repayment of funds or loss of funding eligibility. The bottom line, treat the ERR like your audit trail. It protects your project and your program. The ERR is a central file that documents the entire environmental review process. It must be complete, organized, and ready for HCD review. Here's what it typically includes. A project description, a clear explanation of the proposed activities, location, project purpose, area of ground disturbance, types of construction methods and equipment, maps. So site maps, floodplain maps, and zoning maps to show project context. Photographs, current conditions to support impact analysis. Site plans, layouts or architectural drawings showing proposed work. Correspondence, emails or letters with agencies like SHPO, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, or local planning departments. Technical studies, reports like Phase 1 ESAs, noise assessments, or wetland delineations. Public notices and RROFs, copies of published notices, and proof of comment periods. A well-documented ERR helps avoid delays and ensures compliance with NEPA and related laws. When reviewing environmental review records, HCD frequently encounters several recurring issues that can delay project approval or funding release. Let's walk through the most common ones. So, insufficient publication periods. One of the most frequent errors is not allowing the full required public comment period after publishing the notice of intent to request release of funds. Shortening this period, even unintentionally, invalidates the notice and requires republication. A vague or incomplete project description. The project description in the ERR must clearly define the who, what, where, when, and how of the proposed activity. A common pitfall is using overly broad or generic language, which makes it difficult to assess environmental impacts or determine the appropriate level of review. For example, saying housing rehabilitation without specifying the number of units, locations, or scope of work is not sufficient. Inconclusive compliance and mitigation documentation. The ERR must include clear evidence of compliance. If mitigation measures are required, the ERR must describe how and when they will be implemented and monitored. Missing or vague documentation, such as a checklist without supporting letters, maps, or studies, can result in a finding of non-compliance. A well-prepared and organized ERR not only speeds up the review process, but also protects the project from legal and funding risks. Tiering an environmental review is a means of making the environmental review process more efficient by allowing parties to eliminate repetitive reviews of categories that will not have an impact and to focus on the actual issues at each level of environmental review. Tiering may be appropriate when the RE is evaluating a collection of projects that should fund the same or very similar activities repeatedly within a defined local geographic area and time frame, such as correcting sidewalks within city or county limits for ADA compliance over a 1 to 5 year period. HUD allows a tiered review process to streamline environmental compliance for programs where specific project sites are not yet known at the time of the initial review. A Tier 1 is a broad level review. This is the programmatic or planning level review. We evaluate all applicable environmental impact categories in general terms based on the overall project area or type of activity. The goal is to identify which compliance items can be fully addressed now and to establish standards and procedures for reviewing individual sites later. Tier 2 is the site-specific review. Once specific sites are selected, we conduct a focused review to address any remaining environmental factors. This includes verifying site conditions, consulting with agencies if needed, and applying any mitigation measures identified in the Tier 1. So it's important that no funds can be committed and no work can begin on a specific site until both Tier 1 and Tier 2 reviews are complete for that site.
Thank you, Michael. Here are a few links to HUD and HCD environmental web pages with some of the information presented today and other useful resources. As previously mentioned, the tile page is an incredibly important resource because it provides detailed explanations of each specific law and authority, along with clear guidance on how to achieve compliance. The HCD Environmental Review page provides information on NEPA, CEQA, and environmental compliance information for applicants. This ends our presentation, and now we're available for any questions. And you may also contact us via email with questions after this training. Thank you for your time. Okay. So we had a few questions that we were able to answer as the presentation happened, but there's a few I wanted to answer live. And let's start with the first one. Aaliyah asks, talks about a project that is going to have both the USDA and CDBG funding to construct a fire hall. And she wanted to know about combined NEPA documents to satisfy both USDA and HUD. I am not 100% familiar with USDA's format, but I do encourage you to combine the formats in a way that reduces repetitive work for the project. The only thing that I ask is that if you use the USDA format, when you send us the NEPA, we need a crosswalk because the USDA format is significantly different. I have found that when that format is submitted as our NEPA clearance, that there will be sections missing, and I have to search throughout their document for those sections. So it makes it really hard for us to review. So give us a crosswalk, tell us what page, just a real simple line by line. This is where this law and authority is. If it's a CEST, it's much easier than if it's an EA. If it's an EA, you have additional things that you have to address in the USDA document. So, and if ours is easier, you might ask USDA that same question. We'd like to do it in the HUD NEPA format. Can we submit this to you and give you a crosswalk so that you can see where the USDA categories are covered? Have I answered all your questions for that one? Marking it done. Okay, so somebody asked if HCD will be sending updates regarding NEPA changes. Well, Michael and I, there's just two of us, and we're trying to stay up on top of all the updates, but we're also doing admin work and we're doing all the project work. So we review all of the projects for all of the programs in the federal side of HCD. So yes, we are trying to keep up on it, and you might not hear about it until we ding you on it. So you've submitted a review, and then we make a comment that says either that's no longer required or the new rule is. I suggest you keep up on the HUD rules also. The HUD environmental HUD has an email list that you can join, and you can pick different categories of what you want to be emailed about. And I know that Michael and I have emails from HUD, and I don't have an email list at this point that I can then forward that on to everybody. That is a good suggestion that we come up with something like that. Okay, we have somebody that has asked if a small portion of an economic development project may result in exterior alterations by replacing materials for like materials in a historic district in compliance with the National Register. Does that automatically mean it cannot be exempt? And would SHPO consultation be required? Now, part of this question I answered in the chat, in the Q&A. And yes, SHPO consultation absolutely is required if you're going to do the exterior alterations. Are the exterior alterations needed for this economic development project? If not, you might consider separating those and doing them at a later time. If you absolutely need this money to do that work, then you are going to have to go through a different level of review. Maybe your original level review, if it was just economic development, would be exempt CE and ST, But as soon as you touch anything and make a physical change, you're going to have to do a different level of review. Are there categorical exclusions that would potentially apply to infrastructure improvements of a more minor nature? For example, the proposed improvement to the city's wastewater treatment plant includes electrical plant panel upgrades and the installation of aerators in the treatment ponds. So if you look up 24 CFR Part 58.35A1, you'll see that that is specific to public facilities. That is not housing, and it's not buildings. So it depends on what the work is. If you're actually making a change to the building, say you're doing some bathroom ADA upgrades, then you can't use that. But if you're only looking at the electrical panels and installation of aerators, right, for treatment plants, to me that fits that repair or reconstruction of public facilities and improvements other than buildings when the facilities and improvements are already in place and you're not increasing by more than 20%, right? So I would start there, but you need to look closely at what you're doing and whether you can meet that, the requirements in that section before you can determine whether it would be a CEST or not. If you have any questions, please email Michael and I. We are happy to answer questions during the application process so that you understand what it is you need to do before you submit. And somebody has asked that we provide our emails. And Michael, if you would put those in the chat.
Yeah, let
And
me
actually,
share
what
this
we're going to
screen.
do is we're going to give you our emails, but we're also going to give you the email that we have a general NEPA email box that way whoever's available next can pick up the email and answer the question if you have one. Okay, I would like to request the PowerPoint. Yes, yes, I am happy to send the PowerPoint with the speaker notes. Susan or Tanner, do you have an email list of everybody that attended so that we can send this out?
Yeah, we could do that.
Okay, thank you. I am not aware. So the question is there a HUD NEPA website that has an overview of changes? And if so, can you post that in the chat? No, there is not. What I'm finding is that suddenly things disappear, right? For environmental justice, it was not too long after the current administration talked about doing away with DEI. So that just disappeared. Environmental just disappeared. What else has happened? Oh, I saw a bill that is talking about streamlining NEPA for certain projects because while the current administration has removed some of, and the Supreme Court too, uh, some of CEQ's NEPA requirements. HUD has adopted their own requirements. And so we can't say NEPA is no longer applicable. It's hit and miss. Like I said, signing up to HUD's email notifications for the environmental category is probably your best bet. Oh, okay. Definition of 90% NEPA completion. So what we're looking for is for you to have completed your assessment for all of the sections and have either started or completed your consultations with tribes and SHPO, but you haven't signed it, you haven't done any public noticing, and then you're submitting it to us. And the reason we ask that is because we do what's called a pre-monitoring. Usually when you do work, if you're an entitlement and you go directly to HUD, they have you just send in your, they have you complete the whole thing, send in your affidavit of public notice and the RROF, and then after the appropriate time with no public objections, they send you an AUGF. And then 2 or 3 years down the road, they might monitor you. And if you've done something wrong, then you have findings and the risk of repayment of funds. So HCD does it a little differently. We look at it while it's still in process and an active NEPA review. We give you feedback about what it takes to be in compliance. So that way, when you're done, it's much less likely that you will have a finding during a monitoring later on. And remember, not only is there the potential from HCD to monitor your project, but also from HUD to decide that they want to monitor that project when they monitor us. And we are monitored a lot more than smaller jurisdictions because we're the state and we pass a lot of money through our doors.
Kirsten, this is Susan Holt, the program manager for CDBG. I wanted to add one more thing. One of the reasons that we want it to be 90% completed is because the NEPA has to be completed before we can get anyone into a standard agreement contract. So if you haven't started your NEPA yet, or you're just barely getting going, then we're going to do an analysis of whether or not your NEPA can be completed in time before HUD grant funds expire with HCD in order to get you into a contract. So
Thank you for that, Susan. That's a great point.
Yeah. So just want to make sure we threw that out there too. We want it to be almost complete, but not those few last things that Kirsten was talking about.
Thank you. Okay, is radon testing going to be required for CEST environmental reviews as part of the contamination and toxic substances section? For context, this would be a single-family owner-occupied rehab program. Yes, it is. If you look at the tile page for site contamination, there is going to be a worksheet for single-family dwelling. There's a worksheet for both multifamily and single family, and it will walk you through whether there is the potential of radon contamination. There are DIY kits that you can offer and the work to remediate any radon, significant radon problems can be included in the grant loan. Yeah, okay. So somebody says, other than hours of construction limits, are there any other conditions not considered triggers or mitigation? Yes. So when we talk about your CEST, when you get to the bottom of the form and you're making a determination, if any HUD mitigations are required, then it can't revert to exempt and it has to publish just the NOI RROF part of the notice. It doesn't have to do a combined FONSI, right? So that saves you about a week on the front end. So you'll have a 7-day comment period, but you still have a 15-day public objection period once you send in the RROF to us. So just look at what is required, right? If you get to your mitigations and you see that there's endangered species required, that's a HUD issue, right? If it is that the local jurisdiction requires you to do a tree survey so that you know what types of trees you're removing and that maybe you have to replace trees of a certain variety over a certain size, that would be a local jurisdiction and you would not consider that a mitigation that keeps your project from reverting to exempt. And if you have any questions and you don't understand during the review process and you're sending it to us for 90% review with the application, we're happy to answer those questions. Is the 7th cycle housing element update an activity that could be found exempt pursuant to 24 CFR 5834? For example, 34A1 exempts environmental and other studies, resource identification, and the development of plans and strategies. I don't see. So the NEPA is for work that's being done with the CDBG dollars that you're applying for through HCD. And I don't know if programs is going to fund the 7th cycle of your housing element update.
I can tell you that CDBG funds do not fund
Yeah.
housing element.
So I think that's a question that I'm not going to answer. I don't know what funds you're using. And it does sound like something you might be able to use that category for. However, I will warn that typically that category, when it talks about the development of plans and strategies, it has to have usually a construction project associated with it because it's associated with one of our federal funding dollars, right? So CDBG or home. So I'm not sure quite how to answer that when you're talking in reference to a housing element update. Oh, the tile page. Michael, do you want to put that tile page
I,
link in the chat?
I
Oh,
threw it
you're
in the
already answering
chat.
the question. Thank you.
Yeah, so you can say you answered it live because I sent it to everybody.
Okay, Brandy, you said, how about endangered species in reference to what? And you can come off mute. I think you're allowed to come off mute and ask me.
That is not a feature, unfortunately.
Thank you. Okay. Elimination of NEPA for ES. Elimination of NEPA for ES. I don't understand the question. I'm going to give you some more time to type and I'm going to go to the next question. Would we get dinged if we include something in NEPA that gets removed by the federal government? That one I definitely don't understand. What do you mean something that gets removed by the, oh, so you're saying that if you include a category and give us the analysis for it and the summary of it, and then the federal government removes that later, no, as soon as we know it's removed, we're going to say you don't need to include that piece. So you're not going to get dinged if you include something that needs to be removed.
I think environmental justice is a good example of that.
Yeah. Will review comment on an EA be provided after notice of award or during the application period? It will be, we don't review EAs during the application period. We look at them for an initial review just to make sure that there's like no really scary things about your NEPA. So that way program staff are only evaluating projects that can be awarded. And then after you've been notified of the award, we'll look at your project NEPA and return comments in a written format to be addressed. Oh, okay. Has endangered species been removed from HUD NEPA? No, it has not. And I haven't heard that it would be removed. So if you know something and have seen something, then you know more than I do. The city currently has a broad level tiered environmental review for activity project that is categorically excluded, subject to 58.5, dated 2023, and is a 5-year plan. Do I need to provide a new document with a 2025 date? No. So if HCD approved your previous broad level review that you're talking about, that was done in 2023, and you know of no reason why it needs to be updated, whether you know of some environmental changes that have impacted the area, then no, we don't need to re-review it. We will need to see it to make sure that you've done and have an approved broad level review before you start sending in the tier twos, right? But no, you shouldn't need to do that. Okay, a jurisdiction has an AUGF under a planning grant is submitting a CDBG application for construction. Will the EA have to be redone because of new regulations? How old is the CDBG, is the original EA that received an AUGF, right? So is it less than 5 years old? Is it 3 to 5 years old, which is kind of the gray area and kind of when a project should be looking to ensure that there's nothing that needs to be reevaluated, right? And I would say no, if it's so, for instance, when they changed and created new rules for floodplain and radon, they said anything that had already received or gone to a certain point in the process wasn't required to follow the new rules. So not necessarily. Now, if it's gotten to a point where it needs to be reassessed, maybe they have changed the scope of work just slightly because now they have new funds and now they can do additional work that wasn't originally anticipated, then yes, you might have to follow one of the new rules. So for CDBG, the applicants are units of local government, right? Cities and counties. And CEQA is your responsibility for your projects. And while it is not required to be, I don't believe it's required to be submitted as part of your application for CDBG, they might ask to see your CEQA clearance. Susan, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, we do not require CEQA at the upload, but if it is, it's a California regulation. So,
It
you
is.
are required to provide and take care of things down to the most restrictive level, which CEQA would definitely be most restrictive. So jurisdictions should make sure their CEQA is in order, but we do not require it at the time of application.
Yeah, and I believe the CEQA rules changed last year. Originally, when it was determined your project was exempt, you didn't have to file all of your exemptions with the clerk, your notice of exemption with the county clerk, and with, oh, they changed their name. It used to be OPR, but it's, I think, LIC now or LCI.
LCI. They're
It's,
Yeah.
LCI.
oh,
Yeah.
that's right. You're right, for that. But I think now you're required to file all of the exempt ones. So look into that. But you are required to address CEQA, and you are prone to a finding if you haven't addressed it correctly, but not by us. Thank you for the thank you. Okay, so this person says the AUGF was issued on 3/15/2024 for the project, and there have been no project updates. So I would just make sure that when you have your application, that you're very clear about the status of your environmental so that we're clear when we get it, right? Now, remember, your application goes in through a grants management program, and then program staff pulls out the documents that we need to review and sends it to us for review. And the more information we have, then the less likely it is that we go off on a tangent, not understanding where you are in your environmental process. And Michael, I think you included the tile page in the chat.
Yes, I did include it in the chat.
Okay.
So, and
I
then,
think
yeah,
we've
those are just the
answered
endangered
all the
species question.
questions. Any last questions? And if you put questions in the chat, I was not monitoring the chat, so you really need to put them in the Q&A. I might have missed it if it was in the chat. Can economic development activities with limited physical components use CDBG-ST subject to, like, activity includes facade improvements? Yes, absolutely. You should be using the CEST subject to if there are any physical activities such as facade improvements. Michael, did you put the general NEPA email box address?
Yeah, Tanner just added that,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I
It's
can throw it in
NEPA
again.
at hcd.ca.gov.
Yeah.
So super
There's-
simple.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tanner.
Yeah, for the anonymous attendee, just check the webinar chat. It's in there.
Okay, anything else? For an owner-occupied rehab program anywhere in my county, is Tier 1 my only option? Well, so let's talk about that. Yes and no. HUD asks you to aggregate and combine any activities that you're considering. So if you have a program and you're saying, whenever I have the CDBG dollars, and maybe for the next 5 years, I'm going to put all of my CDBG dollars and all my CDBG program income into rehabbing these owner-occupied homes, then yes, you should be doing a tiered review. And you would start with the tier 1 and clear as many of the sections as you can at tier 1. Now, that does often require a public notice at the end of it, but it's really not that big of a deal because you're talking about reviewing projects that are single family dwellings, and there's really nobody that wants to see or have input on what somebody's doing with their home. This does allow you at the end of that to use a tier 2 process, and now all those questions that were answered at the tier 1 level don't need to be answered at the tier 2 level. And that's helpful if you know there's no floodplains in your area or no airports that are going to impact your program, because you know all of the homes are outside of the airport clear zones for your section, for your community, right? So there are sections that you can get rid of up front. Maybe endangered species. Maybe your program only allows a certain type of rehab interior to the house, and anything that's exterior to the house would be minor and not disturbing to nearby wildlife. Then you could clear that one at the tier 1 and not have to address it at the tier 2. So, the HUD rules ask that you look at everything that is either within a certain geography, right? So if it's within a city limit or a county limit, and that has the same like components to the project. So if it's all single family dwelling rehab and it's all you're using your CDBG dollars for it, then yes, I suggest you do a tiered approach. Now, maybe you're like, I only have $100,000 for this across 5 years. And we're doing 25 to 50,000 per home. So I might only have, 5 homes or 10 homes or however many homes that you do, and you don't know after the first one that is applied, you don't know when that's going to happen. I guess you could do an individual CEST for each one, but then you've also got to look at whether you need to consult with SHPO and with tribes and do a informal consultation with endangered species for U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So it's not always saving you time to do those things individually.
Any other questions?
Oh, yeah, we're 2 minutes over. So if there
Yeah.
are no other questions, actually, even if there are other questions, we're going to ask that you email us at our general email box, and we're going to end the webinar now to be respectful of everybody's time. And we will get that list from Tanner, and we will mail out our presentation with the speaker's notes.
Thank you both. We appreciate your time. And thank you everyone for coming on today.
Thank you, Tanner, for setting us up, and Susan for answering those questions that I couldn't answer for people.
Yeah, thank you so much.
See you later.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good
Bye,
day.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.